when we talk about Islamic orthodoxy, even the word orthodoxy when it comes to Islam, it's controversial whether we should use the word or not. But for simplicity, we're using those terms. When we talk about Islamic orthodoxy, is Islamic orthodoxy a point or a circle? Is it a spectrum or a point? It's a huge discussion, but it is a spectrum, not a point. It is a spectrum from our view as human beings, but from the divine perspective, it is a point. Because when it comes to disagreements between the scholars, in the sight of God, at least what I believe in the sight of God, if there is a disagreement and you have two different positions, in the sight of God, one is right, one is wrong. If this is a disagreement of conflict, اختلاف تضاد, not a disagreement of variety, اختلاف تنوع. If it is a disagreement of conflict, halal and haram. One scholar says halal, one scholar says haram. In the sight of God, it is either halal or haram. From our perspective as human beings, both positions can belong to Islamic orthodoxy, because both positions can be supported by evidence, upheld by great mujtahids, supported by evidence, and accepted within mainstream Sunni Islam. In this case, these positions, even though they are conflicting, they will both belong to Islamic orthodoxy. Now, a general scheme for doing apologetics, in general, even if this is basically a dialogue between you and someone, not necessarily that you're working to construct a paper in defense of Islamic doctrines or practices, but you are sitting with a friend of yours and something comes up. Whatever, like a discussion about anything related to Islam, jihad in Islam, anything, war in Islam, this or that. How you will have to be systematic about your discourse, about, what is it that you want to impart to this person? What is it that you want to share with this person? What is it that you want to include in your writing or your paper? There are three main elements. So clarification, justification, and application means what? Means that you need to clarify the spectrum of Islamic positions concerning this issue. What does Islam say about it? Because to begin with, the people may be misinformed. Because if you have misinformation, misinterpretation, and misapplication, the people may be misinformed about the spectrum of Islamic positions concerning the issue of military conquest or the use of military force. So here is what Islam says, and when we come to applications, we'll talk about jihad in particular, but I just wanted to talk about the general scheme, basically the blueprint of any paper. You want to clarify what Islam says. Then you want to justify what Islam said, right? Because that's apologetics. It is systematic, argumentative discourse in defense of a doctrine. You want to justify what Islam says. And here is, you want basically your knowledge of the culture, knowledge of the background of the person, knowledge of the dominant sort of trends. You want to use all of this in this sort of segment, justification. Now, as we said, when you justify, and we will come back and talk about it more, you're trying to justify mainly what? The spectrum of orthodoxy. Let us say there are positions outside of Orthodoxy. You don't need to spend much time justifying those positions, unless you need to mention them for the reason of your apologetics, and we will come back and talk about which positions we can mention. But justification is important, and keep in mind also that you could skew the spectrum of orthodoxy by giving equal weights to unequal arguments, or equal weights to unequal positions. This is how you skew the perception of orthodoxy in the minds of the recipients. Then application. Once you have clarified the different positions, Islamic positions on the spectrum, once you've justified those positions, you've given sort of like, you have to be careful by how much weight you give to every position. But once you have done this work using your great knowledge, you have to have great knowledge of the trends and the cultural trends and philosophies that are popular, particularly, the philosophical background of your particular audience and so on. Then you'll have to move on to step 3, application. And they come in this order most of the time. How do you, they call this antiquity and modernity, how do you cross the bridge between antiquity and modernity? But we do believe that even using these terms could be somewhat detrimental to people's perception of the relevance of the religion to our times, and the permanency and the continuity. Anyway, we do recognize that there is a difference, huge differences that happened in our world in the last 200 years that made a huge gap between modernity and antiquity. There is a huge gap in people's lifestyles and people's just in the global culture, not a particular culture, but in the global culture. There are huge differences.